Good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 7 of Accessions Week, entitled Unfinished Business of Arab Accessions at 25 Years of the WTO. A warm welcome to our distinguished panelists and to our viewers. My name is Mena Hassan from the Accessions Division of the WTO. Viewers can send questions to this webinar by using the Q&A chat option on the bottom of their screens. This webinar will be run in English, but we may be able to accept 1 or 2 questions in Arabic, which we will translate to our participants. Now, without further ado, I now have the pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists. His Excellency Ambassador Saleh Al-HUSSEINI. He's permanent representative of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the WTO, and he's also coordinator of the Arab group at the WTO. He was a key member of Saudi Arabia's negotiating team for the accession to the WTO. I have the pleasure to introduce His Excellency Ambassador Salim BADDOURA. He's permanent representative of Lebanon to the WTO. He's a long-serving diplomat who represented Lebanon in many countries, with his last posting being in Vienna. I have the pleasure to introduce Ms. Hilda Al-HINAI. She's Deputy Permanent Representative of the Sultanate of Oman to the WTO. She participated in Oman's accession negotiations to the WTO and acted as chairperson for the Working Party on the accession of the Seychelles from 2009 until 2014. Last but not least, I have the pleasure to introduce Mr. Zaher Al-QATARNEH. He's Assistant Secretary General for Technical Affairs, and he's also Director of Foreign Trade Policy Directorate at the Ministry of Industry, Trade, and Supply of the Kingdom of Jordan. Mr. Al-QATARNEH was posted to Jordan's permanent mission in Geneva from 2011 to 2016. Now, excuse me, before I give the floor to our distinguished speakers, let me just maybe give a brief introduction regarding our session this morning. As you all know, the Arab region is remarkably rich with its natural resources, diverse cultures, and home to the earliest cradles of civilization. With a population of over 400 million, the region, which comprises 22 Arab countries, spans from as far as the Indian Ocean in the east to the Atlantic in the west. But nevertheless, with so much potential, the share of the Arab region in world trade is only 5%. When excluding oil, the Arab region's non-oil exports make up about 2% of world exports. Intra-Arab trade is also very low, less than 10%. Now, if we come to the multilateral trading system, out of the 22 Arab countries, 9 joined during the GATT. And since the establishment of the WTO in 1995, 4 Arab countries have completed their accessions to the WTO under Article 12. Both Jordan and Oman, they joined in the year 2000, Saudi Arabia in 2005, and Yemen in 2014. This year, 2020, marks a special year for the Arab region, as 3 of the 4 who have joined the WTO celebrate their milestone anniversaries. Both Jordan and Oman are celebrating their 20th anniversary of WTO membership, and Saudi Arabia is celebrating 15 years of membership this coming December. Having said this, it is also a reality that currently the Arab region has the largest number of countries outside the multilateral trading system, with 8 countries who are currently in the process of accession. We have Algeria, Comoros, Iraq, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and the Syrian Arab Republic These countries account for more than 1/3 of the 23 ongoing accessions. Moreover, several of these countries are considered fragile and conflict affected. Finally, the accession process for Arab countries has ranged from the longest running in WTO history, and that is the case of Algeria. Now it's been 33 years that they are trying to accede to the WTO. And the youngest acceding government is Somalia, which started the process in 2016. Against this background, let me now turn to our distinguished panelists, who will each have about 10 minutes to make their statements, and then we open the floor to questions. Let me now first turn to Ambassador Saleh Al-HUSSEINI and ask him, as coordinator of the Arab group, to give us first an overview of the Arab members' participation in the WTO and Arab countries in the process of accession. And how can the WTO membership bring about much needed economic growth and political stability in the region? I will also like to ask him to share with us his insights on Saudi Arabia's 15-year anniversary of WTO membership. Your Excellency, you have the floor. Thank you. Sorry, we need to unmute. Can you please unmute?
Do you hear me?
Okay, yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and a great honor to be with this intellectual panelist for important subject. First, I would like to thank the DDG, Mr. Alan Wolf, who has tireless efforts pushing the accession exercise forward. And I would like to thank the WTO Secretariat for organizing this events. And I would like to extend my thanks to you, Ms. Mena Hassan, and her team for their outstanding efforts in organizing this session. Let me also extend my warm welcome to all speakers and participants joining us today. I hope that you and your family all managed to stay safe and well during the last few months. Answering your question, before that, I think the existence of WTO is behind most of the prosperity that we enjoy for the last few decades. And WTO rules also behind bringing a big segments of the population around the world from poverty to above the poverty line. And nobody can ignore the importance of the trade. And most of the economy, emerging economy now, they are also a product of globalizations. For the first questions, I think you already covered this in your introduction about the exceeding countries in the Arab world. We have a group here in Geneva, all members, exceeding members and existing members, keen to speed up this exercise because we can see the benefit that go directly to the more stability and more prosperity for the region. And we thank the Accession Department and the WTO, who share with us this ambitious target. Your second question, I think WTO agreement is beyond a trade issue. It is the accession to WTO. It works on the uncertainty to be eliminated. This is a very important one. And also, investors can have safetiness on their investments because they have a predictable system. Also, they can defend any barriers will put on their products, because nobody now, most of the countries, even the small and medium enterprises, nobody produce. All producers around the world looking for a bigger demand, a bigger market. And this is came through the multilateral system. And what I can see, the accession to WTO, number one, give you a market that's bigger than your market, local market. And this is make your investment, any investment, more viable and at a large economic scale. Also, the banking system who finance projects will be more relaxed if you are under the umbrella of a multilateral system, because the risk is small, because any problem that you will have, you can go to solve it through concerns, through dispute, and other ways that WTO provided. I think the experience that we have in Saudi Arabia, we have an open economy before we came, but even though we have strengthened this more during our accession exercise. And the foreign investment is important. Most of the emerging economy that we can see today, most of the growth they have for the last 2 decades came from international direct investment or indirect investment. And that's why it is very important. And I think the Middle East exercise a turmoil and needs any policy that will strengthen stability, predictability, and prosperity. And definitely joining WTO serve this purpose. I think after we joining the WTO, we have enjoyed more foreign investments, not just foreign investment, but even the Saudi investment who invest abroad. The market become more attractive for them to come alone or to come with their partners. And you can see the export numbers that all exceeding countries, which is called the Article 12. The growth of their export is 9% for the last 25 years. And if you compare it to the existing members of WTO, their growth is 3%. That's mean 3 times. Why? Because the newly exceeding countries has a new opportunities, and that's why their growth, export growth, is tripled of the growth of the existing countries. again, I think the system is very important. If we don't have the multilateral system, I don't think we could have solved the financial crisis in 2008, but because of the system, we have solved it quickly. If we don't have this system, the situation now with COVID-19 would be worse. And I think even if you have an example, if somebody in a bloc group of countries, they may leave. But if there is no multilateral system, WTO, they may not leave, because the other option is without enjoying the multilateral system. I would like to stop because you told me 10 minutes, and I believe my hours is exactly 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your interesting intervention, which highlights the importance of WTO membership for Arab countries. Things that you mentioned, like predictability, transparency, are a key benefit, as well as greater market access and more investment. So thank you for this. Now, interestingly enough, Lebanon was one of the 23 original contracting parties that founded the GATT in 1947, but it left the GATT in 1951. In February 1999, Lebanon applied for full membership to the WTO, and it began its accession process 21 years ago in 1999. Our next speaker, Ambassador BADDOURA of Lebanon, will share his views on Lebanon's long journey to WTO accession. He will inform us about the current challenges, but also the potential opportunities from WTO accession. Ambassador BADDOURA, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored to share the panel with such distinguished colleagues and friends. You know, many probably know about a pleasant comedy, Hollywood comedy of the late 80s, When Harry Met Sally. The plot is about Harry and Sally that are subconsciously in love with each other, but keep meeting and breaking for futile reasons. Let's say that when Lebanon met the WTO, we ended up somehow with similar twists and turns in the relationship. Now, more seriously, Lebanon, yes, Lebanon and the WTO, as you correctly pointed out, were meant to at some point, agree on a protocol of accession together. After all, Phoenicians that inhabited Lebanon lands in antiquity are famed for having invented international trades 2,500 years ago. Okay, time has passed, but it is in our genes, and I think that an organization like WTO is congenial, is still very congenial to the Lebanese spirit. The question is then, therefore, why is it that since 1999, the moment when the Working Party was established, the situation has kept ebbing and flowing? Despite efforts on part of the WTO, of the Lebanese Ministry of Trade and the chair of the Working Party, France, and despite progress on multilateral and bilateral process negotiations, we came to standstill. First time we came to a standstill in 2009 due to political instability in the country. In 2015, the Lebanese Ministry of Economy and Trade displayed again readiness to revive the process. Country visits took place, a roadmap was envisaged, documentation was submitted, some reforms on legislation level were passed. But in 2017, again, the Lebanese authority paused and said that it has become difficult for Lebanon to move forward along the same terms that were discussed between 2000 and 2009. 2009, the last WP. Because of drastic economic and political shocks that engulfed the country following the Syrian cataclysm. In 2019, again, some readiness has been shown by Lebanon, but the current meltdown and the COVID crisis foiled the attempt. The reason of this tumultuous relationship doesn't rest on animosity. I think that from both sides, there has always been a real eagerness to engage. The WTO knows that Lebanon has very liberal outlook and is a market economy oriented. Its openness to the outside world, etc. So the WTO was interested really to engage with Lebanon, even though Lebanon is a very small country and a small economy. And on the other hand, for Lebanon in general, and like my dear friend Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI said, we shared the view that there will be benefit in terms of reform, of attracting boosting our trade, etc., or predictability. So I share his views, but despite the fact that there are differences between the two economies of Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. So why is this process impeded and is kept impeded? I will share some views, and these are my personal opinions here. I'm not making a statement, you know. It's my personal opinion, and it's food for thought. First, we have to take stock of the domestic turbulences in Lebanon in the last 2 decades. You know, the discussions with the WTO started in a time when Lebanon was in a kind of neoliberal mood. It was overall the buoyancy in the general atmosphere in the Middle East. There were some hopes that things were gonna evolve to the better, maybe treaty of peace in the Middle East, in the horizon, etc. So, but the mood started to swing after the assassination of the late Prime Minister Hariri. And the situation being more constrained, we had a shift in mood, the government, towards a more protectionist mindset. Second, the Lebanese political system is very complicated, and it doesn't function on the basis of majority-minority like other democracies. In Lebanon, before vital decision, before deciding on vital decisions, a consensus between the major political actors in the country has to be reached, even if these are in the opposition and the rest are in government. It doesn't matter. Vital decisions need a consensus among the major actors in the country. Otherwise, it doesn't fly. It doesn't work. So, and this issue of WTO has proven divisive. It has not been, in my opinion, it has not been discussed politically the way it should has been discussed. And we cannot, of course, but I think it's the case of all countries, we cannot deny existence of some vested interests that were not very comfortable with the process. And it was very difficult at that moment, beginning of the 2000, it was difficult for Lebanon to diversify its economy in a very adverse situation in the Middle East. You know, in the Middle East, politics and security issues impeded true economic regional dialogue. and constricted foreign direct investment in the region and in Lebanon. So in this context, it was Lebanon felt a little bit afraid of engaging, because the ground didn't seem to be conducive. And as I've said, the fact that the economy was not diversified, I think somehow made us put a break a little bit. And one has to admit as well that since the inception of the Syrian war, things have deteriorated drastically in Lebanon. Not only the refugee crisis of unprecedented magnitude, but the fact as well that we depended on trade routes from Syria to Jordan to Iraq, etc., in order to boost our trade. So all this setting was totally disrupted. Add to that the fact that the turbulences in the region totally the tourism shrank, the mood was more pessimistic, and the Syrian war has exacerbated the already existing weaknesses in the Lebanese economy to a point of meltdown of the economy and finance we are living now. The country is now fighting for its survival with a debt of totaling 170% of the GDP, with a poverty rate of 50%, with rampant inflation, with a contracted economy, with a liquidity crisis in foreign currency that risks to totally lead to collapse of the banking sector, and a very harsh capital control. So it's such a condition, you can imagine easily that the priorities has shifted somehow. So that doesn't mean that we have turned our backs to WTO. Not at all. My presence here indicates that we are determined to keep the ball rolling. Exchanges between WTO and Lebanon are still ongoing. Lebanon will profit from activities, from capacity building, and studies are done by the organization, and we play our role as an observer as much as possible. But in order to leapfrog, we need a certain stabilization in the country, domestic stabilization in the country inside, in order to reach the necessary consensus and to embark on the necessary reform and to lead a true negotiation. We need some kind of stability in the country. And in my opinion, we need a certain stabilization at the level of the region itself, because for a country to assess our future capacity, challenges, opportunity, competitiveness, these are essential basis for carrying forward the process. It's very difficult in a very volatile region like the current Middle East, that it's not really even integrated to the global economy compared to other regions. So we need to know how the Middle East is going to be reconfigured economically, financially, politically, in order to help us shape our decision and our position in that regard. And we shouldn't forget either that the current situation at the world stage, and Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI pointed out to that, is currently is not very encouraging. It's more of acute competition, eroded multilateralism, bilateral arrangement, etc., at the expense of the multilateral trade regime. And even the WTO, let's face it, is on a crossroad. I mean here that it's understandable for a country that has not yet joined to feel a little bit apprehensive. So the question now is, what about Harry and Saleh? What about Lebanon and WTO? I don't have a crystal ball. What I can say is that, of course, we think that we are a country that always favor multilateralism, not only in trade, in everything. And we would, of course, welcome the day when we will be in a position to join the WTO and to play our modest role in that. But currently, due to domestic situation and due to the general outlook, it's very difficult. And we have to appeal to the international community to help us to overcome the current hardships, because I think that Lebanon is, despite everything, a country that is important in the Middle East, because it's a beacon of tolerance, of coexistence, of different communities. Its geographical situation is important. So I think that the international community should really help this country that has not stopped suffering since the 70s. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your insightful remarks and for sharing with us the story of Harry and Sally. Clearly, accession to the WTO is a difficult process, which may take many years. But as you've highlighted, there are many times the challenges that are on the domestic level and also political challenges which hinder the process. Now, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, Jordan joined the WTO in April of 2000. Our next speaker, Mr. Zaher Al-QATARNEH, will provide his insights on Jordan's 20th anniversary of WTO membership, and especially what has been the value of membership for Jordan in the WTO. And if you have some of the lessons learned and the best practices. Mr. Al-QATARNEH, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mena. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me well? Okay. Allow me first to start by appreciating the invitation to be a speaker in this very important accession workshop virtually, and to be among this distinguished delegate. I want to regard His Excellency Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI and His Excellency Ambassador BADDOURA and my dear friend Hilda and yourself for being together, sharing our experiences, and to see how we can share our knowledge in the accession process. First, as you mentioned clearly, we joined in 2004, April 2000. But if you allow me, I will start by giving you a brief on what happens during our negotiations with the WTO. It's not going to take long. Then we go into the benefits and the advantages and disadvantages. So just to give our friends and audience a brief on what they can expect during negotiation to accede to the WTO. We submitted our application to accede to the GATT before it was transferred to WTO in 1995, and then the file was moved to WTO in 1995. And our first meeting of the working party was held in October 1996. We had a very intensive round of negotiations started in 1998. With those negotiations, they come like comprehensive political, social, and economic reforms. And we had to build a modern state based on economic vitality and sustainable potential for growth and prosperity. So we had some tough negotiations. When we started, we established an institutional framework to ensure functioning of the negotiation process. So the government appointed the Ministry of Industry and Trade as the focal point, and we were the leading entity in the process. A special unit was established. and we had appointed a chief negotiator, and the team was formulated to take over all these commitments and all this process of negotiation. Hala, we had many challenges during the negotiation. We need to introduce many trade reforms, changing legislation. We had hold several meetings, workshop, public awareness, campaign, addressing public institutions. So it was a long process. We had 5 intensive rounds of negotiations. It was not as long as our friends in Lebanon, but it was like 5 intensive campaigns, like not campaigns, like negotiation rounds. This was a little bit challenging for a small staff, a focused one, because you need to train them, you need to build their capability to negotiate, to address the commitments and the requirements of all member states. So you can manage the load of work in the negotiation team and the team and all the Jordanian entities. The legislative process for introducing new laws or amending existing ones to comply with WTO requirement was not less challenging, taking into consideration the lengthy legislation process, which usually starts with drafting legislation, taking to cabinet, and then go to the parliament, see it in the upper house, and then the Senate, and goes through to the legislative procedures. We had almost 36 amended laws and regulation to meet Jordan commitment within the WTO framework. Those regulation was in intellectual properties, meteorology, agriculture, national production protection, sales tax, as well as customs, import and export. Non-investment or non-Jordanian investment regulation was introduced as well. So all those regulations was amended, approved to meet the WTO requirements. We received a bunch of questions. We, I think, reached 1,000 questions of all members. So this was challenging enough to the accession team as well. But we managed to provide replies to all questions with the help of the Secretariat. And here I want to jump in to thank the Secretariat of the WTO, especially the Accession Department, for their help. And as I mentioned, it was only 5 rounds of negotiations. So this was relatively short time to reply to all the questions, but we managed to do it as Jordan. This took a long time, and this will become some of the challenges that the member acceding to WTO will face. Commitments, many questions, requirements to meet the WTO already members, let's say, needs. You need to address their needs, you need to address their interest in order to come over it and to become a member. So we spent long hours in drafting, and we spent our time in the WTO, and here I jump into a nice maybe and a funny memory of the Jordanian team, where they were held their meetings. It was held in the WTO cafe. It was not in a meeting room. And this for the WTO acceding member, because when you call a member to come to meet you, sometimes they do not show up. Sometimes they may be busy in another meeting. Sometimes you stay in the room and wait for someone to come, but it end up having the second meeting without having this coming. So the Jordanian members of the committee decided to stay in the WTO cafe, and whoever cross over, we grab and meet. So this was like forcing them to meet, forcing them to come and talk to us, and forcing them to discuss and to explain what we need and why they want this commitment and how we can come over it. Not to organize meeting after we managed to see like many of the country officially, but many of our colleagues in the WTO, we managed to grab them when they were passing by the WTO cafe, which became named actually after our negotiation, the Jordanian cafe, because all the team and even the chief of negotiator stayed there. They grabbed the delegates and we just discussed. It's like forcing them to talk. So you cannot simply hold of everybody. So this was difficult, but we managed. In 1999, the WTO General Council concluded negotiations with Jordan and approved its accession package. The package included a high level of commitment, as we are a newly acceded member back then to the WTO, and we became a full-fledged contracting party. And April 11, we became the 136 full-fledged members, and we started our journey with the WTO. And over the last 20 years, we fully implement our wide range of commitment and embodied in the WTO agreement. So we liberalized our services sector, providing market access to foreign investors and services provider of WTO members. In trading goods, we reduced custom duties over a 10-year transition period, which was fully achieved in the year 2010. Yet, a limited number of goods were excluded from the tariff reduction. Some is like agriculture product, tobacco, and alcohol. We at Jordan, we even joined the WTO Information Technology Agreement, the ITA. Those products enjoy zero tariff upon importation in Jordan. Those commitments were already contained in the accession protocol. So during your accession protocol, you are committed to accede to some of the plurilateral, let's say, agreements and initiatives. So this was one of the Jordanian commitment as well. So we joined and we became like member in this ITA. We are a strong believers in the multilateral trading system in Jordan. And we commit to contribute toward the strengthening of a free and fair global trade and in close cooperation with the WTO. What happens with the WTO? It improved the level of prosperity and development in Jordan. In fact, since the accession to the WTO, we succeeded in achieving significant economic growth rates, which have been positively reflected in the macroeconomic indicators. I'll give you some examples and numbers. GDP at current prices, in 1999, we were 8.2 billion US dollars. In 2019, we are 44 billion US dollars. GDP per capita from 1,722 US dollar moved to 4,162. The national exports jumped from 1.5 billion to 7.1 billion in 2019. The imports as well jumps because it's a free trade from 3.7 to 19.4. This affected the trade balance, but still, it's as a small economy, this is in favor of other partners, such as the big economy. Foreign direct investment in Jordan was stable. Why I'm saying stable, there's no significant improvement, is because of the turbulence of the region. But regardless the unrest in the region, Jordan managed to secure the level of foreign direct investment at the same level and a little bit higher. So we were not, let's say, we were not able to manage to get a lot of, or as much as we expected, foreign direct investment, because you know what happens in the region and our neighbors countries, the unrest in there, and what came to the Arab region during the last 10 years. So this affected a little bit our, let's say, numbers in foreign direct investment, but overall, we managed to do well. I'll give you just some 2-3 minutes on the lesson learned and advantages and disadvantages. What we learned from our accession to the WTO is the lengthy process. It is very lengthy, and you need to be patient and you need to know how to accommodate all the requirements of the other people, so, and the other countries. So it is lengthy. Don't even think that it's very easy and short. It requires like a well-established channel of communication among all relevant stakeholders. So you need to talk. The preparation is a must, and the preparation is the vital key, and it should be institutionalized. What we learned that the negotiating team should be led by one person, and it's a must for this person and the negotiating team not to be changed frequently, because they talk with other members, they talk with, and they get some details sometimes verbally, not written on the papers. So they follow and they know how to accommodate the needs, and if there is some specific issue, they can deal with it because they have a background, not because they jumped in and they read the papers. So it's very important to keep the negotiating team leader in place as long as it takes, because this will help you at least sustain. And it's already very important to accelerate negotiation. And you need to hold on everybody and to talk to them, and to try to finalize the accession as soon as possible, and the soonest is better. Advantages from acceding to the World Trade Organization is the multilateral trade system is an open border, and not set governing rules and we have to set the governing rules in a very transparent manner. And it is very vital, because this will help and protect the rights of small developing countries such us. So you have to be transparent. The governing rules should be transparent. Joining WTO will support domestic reforms, because you can force the domestic reform legislation or building or the institutional building you have within your system. You can force it by committing to the WTO. So it's very important, and it's helped you a lot to secure a domestic reform. It will make your life easily, I think, instead of fighting all parties and whatever. This is a requirement, and this should be changed, and this is the best practice, and we need to do the reform. So it helps you a lot, opens doors, let's say. And it facilitates integration to the global value chain and allow international trade to expand and diversify. Sometimes you don't have free trade agreements with other countries, but the WTO rules help you to access their market and to protect your products and your production lines and whatever. WTO membership provides a platform to settle trade disputes, and this is one of its important roles. So the dispute settlement system within the WTO is very important, and this system provides developing countries, let's say, expertise in helping them building capacity, and even during their dispute process, there is the advisory center and the WTO that can give them all the help needed to make their cases and to do the hearing and to prepare their documentation. The disadvantages that we saw, it was not very much disadvantage as such, but we can we try to think of some of the disadvantages. Is the cost of the implementation WTO agreement, and confirming the existing principle, which might require sometime costly investment in national infrastructure. So for countries with the small resources or limited resources, this will be very costly, and maybe someone will see as a disadvantage. Why we invest in a national infrastructure just to commit to the WTO? Sometimes they don't see it as a reform need, but this a little bit will become sort of a disadvantage, but not as such. Building the capacity of the team and the people working with the WTO sometimes is challenging. And here will jump maybe the donors from the WTO members and the WTO secretariat, but sometimes it's not enough, and it's not, let's say, frequent enough for you to follow up. So this might take you long. And if you change the team, that means you need to start from the beginning. That's why it's very important not to change the team. Yeah, and sometimes you need to, for standards, you need labs. You need to create new labs, you need to train examiners, you need to work with customs to train them how to deal with the specific issues. And as I told you, the donors will jump in here and they will help you. And the foreign competition. For small markets and for small economy with a small industry, sometimes those private sector will find it very challenging to compete. And this will say that you are opening a very dangerous doors for us, how we can compete with the free trade with the big players. So, and this should require sometimes further investments in our industry while we are not doing well because of some problems we have. So why we open doors. So those are some disadvantages coming from the people that they are, let's say, against acceleration of acceding. But still you can come over it by technical assistance provided by WTO or by any other donors, any organization, so they can accelerate the production or maybe advance the production and upgrade the production lines in different aspects. Plus, it will give them opportunity to go further and to have new markets. So I'll stop here. I hope that I gave you a little bit of a brief and covered the questions raised by Mena, and I'm ready to take more questions. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Zaher, for your very comprehensive and interesting intervention, and for giving us the details of the accession process with the different rounds of negotiations that Jordan had to go through, but also the tips that you've mentioned, I think will be very useful for those that are trying to negotiate their accession process. And especially the tip on the cafe. I think that one we should all try and remember. So thank you very much. Now, last but not least, my fourth and last speaker. As I mentioned, the Sultanate of Oman joined the WTO in November 20 years ago. Ms. Hilda will share with us her experience on Oman's 20th anniversary of WTO membership, and also how Oman has benefited from this, and if she has lessons learned. Thank you very much. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mena, and thank you to all the distinguished speakers. It is an honor for me to be here today with all of you, ambassadors, and my friend Zaher. Zaher took at least 3 minutes of my time, so he will have to make it up for me later on. Coffee in the Jordanian cafe or something like that. I would like to thank the DDG Wolf, Micah, Mena, and all the colleagues in the Accessions division for organizing this important event. On the 9th of November this year, Oman will celebrate its 20th anniversary since joining the WTO, as you mentioned. 20 years ago, Oman was negotiating accession to the WTO with a small department on international organizations in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, with only 3 staff at that time. Today, Oman has a Directorate General on international organizations and commercial relations with 32 staff. The Directorate General is in charge of WTO, WIPO, UNCTAD, ITC, GCC, the Arab League, ESQA, and all other regional and international trade-related organizations. As I only have 10 minutes for my intervention, and Zaher took 3 of them, I'll try to focus on the challenges and benefits of accession, 20 years of accession. First, I will summarize the benefits of Oman's accession. As our previous speakers already mentioned, membership to the WTO helped Oman to build capacities in the area of international trade. In the last 20 years, we managed to train more than 100 Omanis for the government sector, university students, as well as private sector and the media. 4 of our trainees have been appointed to work in our WTO office in Geneva. and more are coming in the next few years. I think Jordan have a very good program of training of their officials on WTO issues, and I think that is a good example that countries can benefit from as well. We used Jordan's example to train our Omani colleagues. Oman has also benefited from the dispute settlement system by joining as a third party in 12 cases and actively participating in one of them. Oman also used the trade remedies agreements by either initiating investigations or replying to other members' requests and preventing members from imposing restrictive trade-related measures by utilizing the rules provided under the agreements. Oman became an active member in some WTO work and participated actively in rules making and in maintaining and preserving the rules-based multilateral trading system through participating in the accessions of other members and chairing some committees. For example, Oman chaired the working party on the accession of Seychelles. Oman chaired the working group on state trading enterprises. Oman chaired the anti-dumping committee, and Oman also was one of the facilitators for the fisheries negotiations. In terms of economic benefits, the previous speakers spoke about the benefits on economy, especially on imports and exports. So in terms of economic benefits, the increase of Oman's imports and exports in value is evidence of the benefits of accession. From 1.9 billion Omani riyals in imports and 247,000 Omani riyals in non-oil exports in the year 2000 when Oman joined the WTO, to 9.9 billion riyals in imports and 3.7 billion Omani riyals in non-oil exports in 2020. Foreign direct investments have also increased to $30 billion in 2019. On transparency and monitoring of other members' actions through the information provided in members' trade policies reviews and their notifications, the WTO Director General's annual report on accessions issued on 21st February 2020 shows that from 2008 to 2017, countries that joined after 1995 had a better record in terms of compliance with their notifications obligations. Original members have improved their record in recent years, and I will come back to this point later on. Now, I would like to speak about some of the challenges that a small country like Oman is facing. The first and most important challenge today is the ability of a small country like Oman to conduct a comprehensive assessment on its 20 years membership to the WTO. This kind of assessment requires technical and financial resources. We do have some indicators of success, but that cannot be attributed solely to the WTO accession. Oman is the host of the WTO chair. The WTO chair can play an important role to conduct such an evaluation, but the chair will need to be assisted with experts from WTO or other international organizations and supported with resources for such a project or evaluation to materialize. The high turnover of trained staff is one of the main challenges that Oman also faces. As the Directorate General in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry is in charge of other international organizations as well, there is only few staff who are dealing with WTO issues. We rely on technical staff in other ministries to support the work and negotiations. Unfortunately, they also suffer from high turnover of trained staff. In the last 15 years, we lost more than 8 of our trained and experienced staff from the ministry. This situation makes it difficult sometimes for Oman to comply with certain commitments, as it takes time to train the new staff to make them capable of dealing and handling technical work like notifications, for instance. That is one reason. When a country joins the WTO, its compliance in the first few years is much better than later on as time goes by because of changes in experienced staff who negotiated accession. Therefore, countries should never stop training new people, and WTO should continue to support members in this area. TPR reports and notifications are important tools to ensure transparency and also for members to understand and to receive updates on other members' trade policies. But in order to fully benefit from those tools, countries should have experts to carry out the analytical work and study the TPR reports and the notifications submitted. In Oman, we lack the human resources and expertise to handle such work. Hence, the benefit from other members' notifications and transparency exercise is limited. Acceding countries should try to build capacity in this area very early on. Another challenge is the link between domestic regulations and policies and international commitments. In some cases, some stakeholders will issue policies and regulations without linking them to their international commitments. This is due in many cases, as I mentioned earlier, to changes in the staff and also to lack of awareness and coordination between different stakeholders. Another challenge is that implementation of WTO commitments can require institutional reforms, as previous speakers also mentioned. This can cause a financial burden on the government budget or can result in a delay in implementation of the reforms due to budget constraints. Countries can seek support from bilateral partners, regional or international organizations in this area. Before I conclude, I would like to mention that WTO membership is not an end, but a means for structural reforms, as has been mentioned, improvement in the investment and business environment, ensuring transparency and predictability of government policies, and being part of the multilateral trading system community. In addition to accession to the WTO and in the current competitive world environment, countries will need to update their rules according to the changes in international environment, and they will need other enabling measures to be made, such as improvement in domestic regulations, in logistics, and in digital infrastructure, in order for them to fully harvest the fruits of their membership and improve their economic performance. Finally, the Director General's annual report on accessions shows that countries that joined the WTO after 1995 under Article 12 are doing better than the original members. They achieved faster growth, as other distinguished speakers mentioned already. Their share of world trade has significantly increased from 7.9% in 1995 to 17.8% in 2018. This should serve as a good incentive for countries to join the WTO. And with this positive note, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear Hilda, for your very useful remarks, but also it was very efficient in terms of timing. So thank you for that. Now we have over 60 participants with us in this session, and we've received very interesting questions. I will start maybe with my first question to Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI of Saudi Arabia, to give us a bit his view on what is the role that regional organizations can play, such as the Islamic Development Bank and the Arab Monetary Fund, in supporting Arab acceding countries. Thank you. Please, you have the floor. You need to unmute, please.
Do you hear me? Okay. I think regional organization and plays a very important role just to help the acceding countries, because most of the difficulties or challenges is in common, and they can organize training. It can be benefited from all countries, and we are giving a special attention to that. And we have communicated as a coordinator of the Arab group in Vienna. I communicated with the Islamic Bank. I communicated with the Arab Monetary Fund in Abu Dhabi. and all of them are very enthusiastic on this. And we believe in Saudi Arabia the importance of this. That's why we have committed $7 million for a program that help countries after they exceed to adjust with the international commitments. And also we have a program with the Islamic Bank, and Saudi Arabia has the highest commitment, Aid for Trade. We have committed $3 million for this program. But I think the biggest region who has non-exceeding countries is the Middle East. And this has to be a priority for all regional organizations, whether the Arab League or I have met also people in the Islamic Bank, and they recognize that also there are big numbers of Islamic members of the international, for the Islamic Bank, are not a member of the WTO. And they believe that their membership, it helps them to benefit from the bank, or to digest the benefit of the bank in a better way. I think the regional institution need to play a very important role, and because the exceeding countries can benefit from to be a member of WTO, but also this requires some infrastructure and some training, and this is I highly recommend the regional organization and the WTO to give, and most of our statements and ministerial meetings in WTO, we give this issue priority to just raise the awareness of the donors countries and the organization. I think I agree this is a very important means to help the exceeding countries.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. Our next question is addressed to Ambassador BADDOURA of Lebanon. And the question is, what is the benefit for joining the WTO for a country like Somalia?
Frankly speaking, I think that the Somalis should answer this question, since they know the context, they know their own context, their own constraints, etc. But in general, if I take this question and if I extrapolate, what is the benefit of joining the WTO for a developing country like Somalia, like Lebanon, etc., notwithstanding the difference in context? I think the panelists, the other panelists made very illuminating presentations on that. There is, of course, benefit before and benefit after. Before in terms of capacity building, of necessary reforms, of transparency, etc. But I have to here indicate that it's not a silver bullet. Joining the WTO is not a silver bullet in order to reach economic prosperity, etc. You join the WTO, of course, you do the necessary, you are more integrated in the multilateral trading system, but absent sound economic policies, absent real commitment for the SDGs for development, absent a context, a regional context that is more conducive to trade, to exchanges, etc., all this would somehow offset the advantages and would not allow you to somehow diversify the economy, diversify your economy, which is condition sine qua non to benefit for trade. If your economy is not diversified, you will trade with what? So you will only be a receiver, whereas it's important for you to diversify in order to enter, to access other markets, to attract foreign direct investment, etc. So it should be coupled. It should be coupled. The accession to the WTO, of course, create a virtuous domino effect in terms of reforms, etc. But it should be coupled as well with a sound economic policy, commitment to development, a true strategy to attract foreign direct investment. Because two things are separated. Being the member of the WTO doesn't necessarily make you an attractive target for foreign direct investment. So it's up to when you have good policies, when you have people that are committed to the development of the country, of course, being part of the WTO could be a good thing. It applies to Lebanon, to Somalia, but I cannot speak on behalf of Somalia in this regard. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. Now I turn to Mr. Zaher for a question. Why, in your view, do you think that the intra-Arab trade is very low? Why do you think that? Thank you.
Okay, I'm unmuted now. Huh? I'm afraid to take more time from Hilda's time. But just to highlight that I took the time spurred by His Excellency Mr. Al-HUSSEINI and BADDOURA. They took 7 minutes and 6 minutes each. So I did not jump into your 3 minutes, Ms. Hilda. So just for this question, why the inter-Arab trade is low, from my view, I believe that there is some similarity in the structure of industry within the Arab countries. And so when you have similar industries, there is no accumulation as such. So they have maybe similar consumer tastes industry, and they are all share the raw materials and whatever inputs. It's very similar. So that's why you cannot see very much intra-trade between the Arabs. So I think there is some restrictions on importation as well in other countries. Some systems are not very liberal. So that's why it is a little bit low. And then on my view as well, some time is the price of the products, because production cost is high in some countries and low in other countries. So that makes it a little bit difficult for industries to enter other markets with competing prices. So mostly it's the similarity in industry. I think that's why it's a little bit a barrier for entering a new market, especially if you have a local industry that produce the same products. So that's why there is limitation. But in terms of diversity, if there is not produced, like between Arabs are very important. Like for Jordan, with the balance of trade, Saudi comes #1 with the trade between Jordan and the rest of the world. So we are neighboring countries and we are Arabs. So our intra-trade is very high. With other Gulf region, with Egypt, with Lebanon, even with Palestine and Syria, Iraq, our numbers are good, but still, as I told you, sometimes there are some barriers, sometimes it's the cost of production, and sometimes it's the similar industry.
Okay, thank you very much, Zaher, for your answer. Now we have a question for Ms. Hilda. Based on your experience when you were involved in the negotiations for Oman's accession, and also when you were chairing the working party of the Seychelles during these years, please, it would be, the audience would like to hear from you in terms of your personal experience and what sort of advice you would be able to give to Arab countries in the accession process, especially small countries. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think at some point, Zaher mentioned, I think, about the importance of keeping communication among the negotiating team throughout the process. Here, I would like to mention those who heard me saying this before in my previous interventions in other sessions. I would just say the importance of 4 C's that are very important for any acceding country. 4 C's are communication, cooperation, consultations, and continuation. And all these 4 C's are important throughout the process of accession. So, of course, you need good communication among the negotiating team. You need cooperation between different government entities. You need to continue consultations throughout the process between all the stakeholders, and a continuation of the negotiating team and the negotiating team leader. In terms of the current situation where we are going, a lot of countries are going through difficulties right now because of the COVID-19. I think it's important for acceding countries to keep the momentum for the accession. This is not the time for them to slow down. It's time for them to keep the momentum. Otherwise, members will forget about them. We'll get busy with other issues that are very urgent at the moment. So, in order for them not to lose focus of other members on their accession, they need to keep the momentum by keeping in touch with their working party members, informing them about the developments in their accession process, and also informing them about the challenges they are facing, and seek advice. So keeping the momentum shows other members that they are engaged and they are still serious about their accession. And also, they have to understand that once they become members, especially in this, I mean, a lot of people say that this COVID-19 issue will continue for at least 2 years, right? So if this situation is going to continue, it's important for members of acceding countries to try to join as soon as possible, because the monitoring mechanism that exists within the WTO framework prevent other members from taking extreme or what we can say extreme measures or permanent trade distorting measures against them. So a membership will protect them from such measures and some such actions that could be taken by other members. Also, I think countries can benefit, acceding countries can take this time to use it as a time to build capacity and train their officials. Lebanon said that they are still in touch with WTO Secretariat and they are benefiting from technical assistance. I think this is very positive thing and very good way to continue being involved in your accession process, even at times when accession is not moving forward. So technical assistance. And because now everything is done virtually, like this session, acceding countries can benefit from technical assistance activities by involving more capital-based officials in technical assistance and training that can be provided by WTO and other international organizations on international trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hilda, for this comprehensive remarks. Now, unfortunately, we only have 5 minutes left. I think the time passed by quickly. We still have lots of interesting questions, but due to the time constraint, I will ask one general question that I will ask each of you to answer. And with that, you can tell us or brief us with your concluding remarks. And we will start with the same sequence of speakers that we had in the beginning. And the question is, what could be the single most valuable benefit from WTO membership, especially for a developing country? So with that, I will ask His Excellency Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI to start by answering this and then his concluding remarks. Thank you.
As I claim that I am economist, the main point is the demand of your economy is within your territory. By acceding to WTO, the demand is the world. And this is make all projects developed in your country more viable. Second, everything is sensitive to you, you can protect it. I give you an example of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia does not import ham, and we continue on this. We don't import alcohol, we continue on this. Also, the agreements give you a full right to protect your national security. I think, for me, even the COVID-19 now we have, if we don't have the multilateral system, maybe the flow of medications and equipments may be less if we don't have this multilateral system. And it is a strategic. Exceeding WTO, my definition, is speeding local economic reforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now, Ambassador BADDOURA.
Thank you very much. I concur with my distinguished colleague, Ambassador Al-HUSSEINI. I could say for a country like Lebanon, it's a sequence. Exceeding the WTO, if well thought, it's not just exceeding the WTO, it should be well thought. And having enjoying the consensus of the major stakeholders in the country. It could lead to good reform policies. It could lead to diversification in a sequence, and it could lead to innovation, which is very important in the global economy, actually. If you do not innovate, you will be left apart. And finally, this formula, this magic formula, diversification, innovation, more trade, etc., more foreign direct investment could help you out in your development policy, which for countries like ours should remain the main priority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Now I give the floor to Mr. Zaher.
Thank you, Mena. I echo my dear colleagues, Their Excellency, the Ambassador, what they say. And I can just make a short answer, which is the integration to the global value chain and support the government for the reform of the domestic reforms for institutional building resulting the great openness. So it will be the reform plus the integration to the global value chain.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Now, Ms. Hilda.
Yes, I think membership to WTO is making you part of you become a member of international community that that makes you a member of international trade. You can take part in rules making on international trade, and that gives you the right to safeguard your interests. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have come to sort of the end of our session this morning. I think it was very fruitful and a useful session with many interesting questions from our participants today. Clearly, there is a lot of unfinished business for many Arab countries who are still outside the WTO. But we hope that after hearing about the different experiences of those who have already joined the system, we will see more Arab countries joining the WTO soon. I would like to thank very much our distinguished panelists and also our viewers here today. The Accession Week is not over. We have a session this afternoon on the roundtable with development partners and 2 more sessions tomorrow on the LDC, accessions, and the private sector. So with this, thank you very much. And now we will close our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear moderator. Thank you.
Thank you all, and see you, inshallah. Best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you.